Before we drift into tonight's tale of Marceline's Centuries Alone, I'd love to know where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always magical, seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches. All right, lights low, blankets up. Let's begin. Our story tonight takes us back further than Finn, further than Jake, further than the playful kingdoms of Ooh as we know them. To really understand Marceline, the Vampire Queen, the musician with the guitar slung over her shoulder, and centuries of heartache behind her eyes, we have to go all the way back to her earliest days. She was born into a world unraveling, a child of two worlds, half demon, half human. And that world she came into was already cracking under the weight of something catastrophic, something that would one day be remembered only as the Mushroom War. Imagine for a moment the skies filled with smoke, the earth scorched and broken. Cities once alive with people and lights had been hollowed out into ghostly shells, their laughter silenced, their streets littered with remnants of a time that would never return. In this chaos, little Marceline wandered, not yet the centuries-old vampire we know her as, but just a small girl with sharp teeth, an otherworldly gaze, and a heart that still longed for safety, love, and belonging. Her father, Hunson Abadir, ruler of the Nightosphere, was distant, unreachable, more interested in his own dominion than in the fragile child he had left behind. And so Marceline's human side, tender and vulnerable, often felt abandoned. She was neither fully of the human world, nor fully of the demon one. This left her in a lonely in-between space, where she struggled to understand who she was meant to be. And yet, in those bleak early years, she was not completely alone. There was one figure who loomed large in her childhood, one who held her hand as the ruins of the old world smoldered. Simon Petrikov. At that time, he was not yet the Ice King we know him as later, not yet lost entirely to the cruel whispers of the crown. He was still Simon, a man fighting desperately against the cold grip of madness. He was a scholar, an archaeologist, someone who once loved deeply and studied the mysteries of the world with wonder. But in Marceline's life, he was something even greater, a guardian. He found her when she was most vulnerable, a little girl hungry and scared in a world that had no place for children anymore. Simon gave her food when she needed it, shelter when she was shivering, and perhaps most importantly, songs and laughter when fear threatened to overwhelm her. He was her comfort, her rock, a reminder of gentleness in a time when the world was anything but gentle. One can picture it, Marceline clutching a ragged stuffed animal in her small hands, sitting by Simon's side as the flames of distant battles flickered against the sky. Simon, with tired eyes, would hum little tunes, sometimes singing softly just to distract her from the horrors around them. To Marceline, he was not the Ice King, not a man teetering on the edge of madness. He was simply Simon, her friend, her protector, the closest thing to family she had. But even in these fleeting moments of warmth, darkness crept ever closer. The crown Simon carried, an ancient artifact of unimaginable power, was slowly eroding him. Every time he placed it upon his head to protect Marceline from dangers, to shield them from marauders or the monstrous creatures that began to crawl from the post-war shadows, a piece of his sanity was chipped away. He knew it, felt it, feared it. And Marceline saw it too. She could see the man she loved as her father figure slipping into someone else, his voice changing, his memory faltering. The heartbreak of a child watching her protector unravel is one of the most painful parts of Marceline's story. She clung to him, begged him not to leave her, and yet there was nothing either of them could do. Simon was fighting a losing battle. Every act of protection, every time he called upon the icy magic of the crown, he was trading away his own humanity. There are stories told of how Simon carried Marceline in his arms across the wastelands, feeding her when she was too weak to go on, singing to her when she was afraid of the night. It was a bond forged in hers and sorrow, one that would define the rest of Marceline's long life. For even as centuries passed, even after she had fought countless battles and lived through endless adventures, she would always remember Simon, not as the mad Ice King, but as the man who once held her hand and promised her safety. Still, the tragedy was inevitable. Simon could not hold on forever. His mind became fogged, his heart weighed down by the relentless pull of the crown. There came a day when he could no longer be the Simon Marceline knew. That slow transformation left her in tears, a little girl crying in the ruins of the old world, begging the one person she trusted most not to leave her. And yet he did. Not by choice, not by malice, but by the cruel fate of the artifact he carried. Simon disappeared into the madness of the Ice King, and Marceline was left truly alone for the first time. A child in a broken world, without family, without a guardian, forced to find her own way through the ashes of civilization. Her small footsteps echoed through the emptiness of fallen cities, her heart carrying both the weight of loss and the fragile spark of resilience. For though Simon was gone, and though the world itself seemed intent on crumbling around her, Marceline endured. She always endured. When Marceline was left on her own, the silence of the world around her became deafening. Imagine a child's voice calling out, echoing through the hollow shells of skyscrapers that no longer held life. No one answered her cries. Windows were shattered, streets broken, and the smell of smoke lingering in the air long after the fires had burned out. For most, this wasteland would be unbearable. But for Marceline, it became her classroom, her playground, and her battlefield all at once. She wandered through ruined cities where the shadows of the past lingered like ghosts. A tricycle rusting on its side. A cracked billboard that once promised a brighter future. Piles of belongings abandoned mid-flight, reminders of how suddenly the world had changed. Marceline was too young to fully understand what the mushroom war had taken away, but she felt the absence in her bones. She could sense the loss all around her, a quiet grief in every empty home she passed. And yet, children have a strange resilience. Even in the darkest places, they find sparks of wonder. Marceline would pick up broken toys, pluck strings on wires as if they were instruments, and imagine stories for the voices that were no longer there. Her creativity, that endless well of song and playfulness we know her for later, was already blooming midst the rubble. Music became her companion when no one else could be. But survival was not easy. Food was scarce. Danger was everywhere. Strange creatures, warped by fallout and magic leaking into the world, began to stalk the ruins. Some were huge, lumbering beasts with twisted shapes, others small but venomous, creeping through alleys at night. Marceline, though only a child, had to learn quickly how to run, how to hide, and eventually, how to fight back. The demon blood in her gave her strength, just enough to endure when a human child might not have survived. Her sharp little fangs, the crimson glow in her eyes when fear surged, they all reminded her that she was not ordinary. But instead of comforting her, these traits often set her apart from what little company she did encounter. Survivors, ragged and desperate, sometimes stumbled across her in the ruins. At first, Marceline would approach with the innocent hope of companionship, but many of them saw her sharp teeth, her unnatural presence, and recoiled in fear. To them, she was another monster birthed by the apocalypse. It hurt her deeply, though she tried to hide it behind stubborn pride. She learned not to linger around groups of people, not to reveal too much of herself. That loneliness, planted in these early years, would grow into the wall she often carried around her heart for centuries to come. She wanted love. She wanted connection. But every rejection made her pull back a little further into herself. Still, she carried Simon in her heart. Even after he was gone, she remembered the lessons he left her. How to find food in unlikely places. How to keep walking even when her legs ached. How to sing to herself to chase away the fear. Those lullabies became the fabric of her soul. The soft hum of Simon's voice was replaced by her own, small and shaky at first, but growing stronger with every night she spent alone. There's an image that stays with many fans of her story. Marceline clutching her beloved teddy bear, Hambo, wandering through a scorched field with her little boots kicking up ash. That bear was more than a toy. It was her link to Simon, her proof that she had once been loved, once been cared for. In a world that seemed determined to strip away every comfort, Hambo remained. Whenever she felt scared, she squeezed him tightly, whispering songs into his stitched ears as though he could keep her secrets safe. Over time, Marceline began to harden. Not in a cruel way, but in a resilient way. She was still a child, but she was learning the lessons of an adult world. Trust was rare, safety was fleeting, and sometimes you had to rely on nothing but your own strength. Nights spent under broken ceilings, days spent scavenging whatever scraps of food she could find, gave her the endurance she would carry forever. And yet, despite the harshness, there was beauty too. The war had ended the old world, but out of its ashes, new, strange wonders began to creep in. Plants that glowed faintly at night, mushrooms the size of houses, rivers that shimmered with colors unseen before. To Marceline, these sights were both frightening and awe-inspiring. She didn't know it then, but this was the beginning of magic seeping back into the earth. The birth of the land of Ooh as it would one day be. For Marceline, these wonders became both friend and foe. Sometimes they offered her food, shelter, and light. Other times they brought danger in the form of creatures warped by the same energies. Through all of it, Marceline learned to adapt, her small figure weaving through landscapes that were already reshaping into something entirely new. But no matter how far she walked, no matter how many nights she spent singing softly to herself under broken skies, the memory of Simon lingered like a shadow behind her. He had been her anchor, and now, without him, she often felt as though she were drifting endlessly. That longing, that ache of abandonment, would never quite leave her. It would echo through her songs, through her laughter, through every mask she wore in the centuries ahead. As Marceline wandered further from the ruins she once knew, the world around her began to feel less like the broken earth she had been born into and more like an entirely new place. The silence of destroyed cities slowly gave way to strange landscapes that defied explanation. Forests of twisted trees, their branches curling into impossible shapes, spread out where suburbs once stood. Craters filled with glowing water dotted the land, their light flickering eerily at night, as if the earth itself still held onto secrets of the war. Marceline walked through these places with wide, curious eyes. She was scared, yes, but she was also fascinated. Children see things differently than adults. Where an adult might see horror, a child sometimes sees mystery, even possibility. And so Marceline's imagination began to color the world around her. She would give names to the glowing mushrooms she passed, hum little tunes as she walked through abandoned highways overtaken by vines, and pretend that the shifting shadows in the distance were her audience, listening to the songs she created on the spot. Music filled the emptiness for her, becoming a bridge between her loneliness and the strange beauty of this post-war land. Her demon side gave her strength, but it also made her hunger grow in ways she didn't yet understand. Sometimes she would feel her fangs ache when she was scared or when her stomach growled from hunger. At first she tried to ignore it, but slowly she realized that she wasn't like other children. Her need to consume red things, whether food, fruit, or eventually blood itself, marked her as different. It was a secret she carried heavily. For even in a broken world, she feared others would see her as a monster. And so she kept her distance, watching from afar whenever she stumbled across camps of survivors. Every so often, she would linger near them long enough to hear laughter around a fire, to hear the murmur of voices telling stories. She longed to walk closer, to sit among them, to pretend that she belonged. But fear always held her back. She remembered the way people had flinched at her sharp teeth, the way whispers had followed her. So instead she watched from the shadows, pressing Hambo to her chest, inventing her own stories to fill the silence. It was during these wandering years that Marceline began to grow braver, not just in body, but in spirit. The Wastelands were dangerous, yet she learned how to face those dangers. When strange beasts attacked, she would run, but sometimes she would stand her ground using sticks or broken bits of metal as weapons. She was clever, resourceful, and quick on her feet. Her courage was not born out of a lack of fear, but from necessity. She was small, she was vulnerable, but she refused to give in. The stubborn spark within her was something she had inherited from both of her parents, her father's raw strength and her mother's human resilience. And though she was alone, Marceline never stopped pretending she was not. She spoke to Hambo as though he could answer, asking him what he thought about the places they passed, about whether the moon looked brighter tonight, or whether the ruins felt too quiet. In those conversations, she kept loneliness at bay. To her, Hambo was more than a toy. He was a friend, a confidant, a reminder that even in emptiness, she still carried love with her. As she grew older, the memories of Simon remained bittersweet. Sometimes, when she was exhausted or frightened, she would close her eyes and imagine his voice, humming lullabies to her. She could almost feel his hand holding hers, steadying her. But when she opened her eyes, there was only the wasteland. That ache of remembering something lost too soon stayed with her, and though it hurt, it also gave her strength. Simon had left her with tools to survive songs, stories, resilience, and she carried them like armor. There were nights when Marceline would climb to the tops of broken buildings just to watch the stars. The sky, though often hazy with ash, still revealed flashes of beauty when the clouds parted. She would lie there, Hambo under her chin, humming to herself. In those moments, she was no longer just a lonely child wandering ruins. She was a dreamer, someone who believed there might be more to life than what she had been given. This belief was fragile, but it kept her moving forward. Even when hunger gnawed at her, even when fear pressed down on her chest, Marceline pushed on. She had no map, no plan, no promise of safety. But she walked anyway, step after small step, because somewhere inside she knew that her story was not meant to end in ruins. And so the child of two worlds, demon and human, survivor and dreamer, began to carve her place into the bones of the earth. She didn't know it then, but every song she sang, every lonely night she endured, was shaping her into the Marceline who would one day become legendary. She was not yet the Vampire Queen, not yet the immortal musician strumming chords of sorrow and joy. For now she was simply a little girl, surviving the aftermath of the end, with a teddy bear in her arms and songs in her heart. But the road ahead would grow darker still, for the loneliness she felt now was only the beginning, and the world had many more trials waiting for her. As the years slowly passed in the ruins of the old world, Marceline's childhood innocence was shaped by the weight of survival. She did not count her age the way other children once had. There were no birthdays, no candles to blow out, no one to mark the passing of time. Instead, her milestones were measured in endurance. The first time she survived a winter alone, the first time she defended herself against a creature far larger than her, the first time she wandered through an entire city without finding a single soul to speak to. What she lacked in companionship she found in the small fragments of the old world she uncovered. Marceline was a scavenger of memories. She picked up cassette tapes and played them, even when the songs were too distorted to hear clearly. She strummed broken guitars left behind in forgotten shops, her small fingers learning how to coax sounds from strings. Sometimes she would sit in empty theaters staring at tattered screens and pretend the flickering shadows were real performances just for her. It was as if she were carrying the soul of humanity forward, holding on to the art, the music, and the joy that the world had left behind. But there was no escaping the sorrow either. There were days when loneliness pressed down on her so heavily that she felt like her small frame might collapse beneath it. She would curl up with Hambo in her arms, whispering to herself, tears streaking her face, and hope that somehow tomorrow would hurt a little less. Those nights were the hardest. The silence became suffocating, the weight of her losses too much for her young heart to carry. Yet each morning she rose again. Even through grief, Marceline carried an unshakable will to keep moving forward. And always there was the memory of Simon. She clung to the image of him kneeling before her, handing her cans of food, humming songs to make her smile. Even when his memory blurred and her child's mind began to forget the finer details of his face, she remembered the feeling he gave her: safety, warmth, love. That memory burned brightly, a lighthouse guiding her even in the darkest nights. It reminded her that she had once been loved, and perhaps she could be loved again. The world around Marceline continued to change. Magic seeped deeper into the earth, altering both landscape and life. Strange new creatures emerged, some harmless, others terrifying. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she watched a pack of glowing wolves slip through a forest, their eyes like embers, their bodies shimmering with faint light. They ignored her, vanishing to the shadows, but the sight left her trembling. This was no longer the earth Simon had once known. Something new was being born in the ashes, and Marceline was there to witness it. Her demon blood gave her the stamina to endure longer than most human survivors. Slowly she grew taller, stronger, and braver. She began to realize that she was not just surviving, she was changing alongside the world itself. The child who had once hidden behind Simon's coat was becoming someone else entirely. She was learning to wield her uniqueness not as a curse, but as a tool. Those sharp teeth, those strange instincts, that unyielding spirit, they set her apart, yes, but they also kept her alive. And as the years stretched on, Marceline's voice became her truest weapon against despair. She would sit atop the ruins of skyscrapers, strumming scavenged guitars, singing into the night. Her songs were part lullaby, part lament, carrying her memories into the wind. Sometimes they were for Simon, sometimes for her absent father, sometimes for the faceless people she passed along the way. Each note was a way of telling the world, I am still here. I am still alive. Beneath her resilience, the ache of loneliness lingered. She longed for someone who would not leave, someone who would not fear her, someone who would see her as more than a half-demon girl wandering a broken earth. That longing would guide many of her choices in the centuries to come. It would lead her into friendships, into rivalries, into love, and into heartbreak. It was a seed planted in these early years, watered by sorrow, and sung to life by the music she carried in her heart. By the time Marceline's path finally began to drift from the ruins of humanity's cities into the strange landscapes that would one day become ooh, she was no longer just a child of the apocalypse. She was something else now, something the new world itself seemed to recognize. She was a bridge between the old and the new, a girl who carried both the scars of the past and the spark of a future yet unwritten. She did not know it then, but the long centuries stretched ahead of her, filled with battles, songs, and loves she could not yet imagine. She did not know that the vampire court awaited her, that kingdoms would rise and fall around her, that her name would one day be whispered across the land with reverence and fear. In these early years, she only knew the ruins, the silence, and the echo of Simon's lullabies in her ears. Marceline, the child of two worlds, had survived the end of the old earth, and in doing so, she had become one of the first children of the new. The ruins of humanity faded slowly behind Marceline as she wandered further into the vast and empty places that stretched out before her. The broken cities, the concrete bones of the old world, gave way to landscapes that felt stranger with each passing mile. Where highways once ran, there were now great cracks splitting the earth. Where suburbs once stood, forests of warped trees had begun to creep, their roots curling over rooftops, their branches reaching hungrily toward the sky. Marceline walked with no destination in mind. She was not searching for treasure or a kingdom or even safety. She was simply walking because stillness made the loneliness louder. If she kept moving, she could pretend she was heading somewhere, that around the next bend she might find something or someone worth staying for. The wastelands were haunting. During the day they seemed endless, wide open and empty beneath the pale sun. At night, they were alive with strange sounds, creatures calling out in tones she had never heard before, the distant rumble of earth shifting, sometimes even whispers carried on the wind that made her clutch Hambo a little tighter. Every step felt uncertain, but Marceline was learning that uncertainty was her companion now. Food was always a problem. She scavenged constantly, picking through collapsed buildings and overgrown stores. Cans of food long past their prime, dusty fruits growing in the wild, the occasional small animal when she was desperate. Her strange craving for red things made her choices narrower, but she adapted. She drank the juice of red fruits, ate berries she found in tangled bushes, even sucked the color out of whatever she could find when hunger grew unbearable. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept her alive. Despite the harshness, Marceline discovered small pockets of beauty in the wasteland. Fields where glowing flowers opened only at night, shimmering faintly like stars fallen to earth. Streams that trickled with red-tinted water, strange and slightly sweet. Once she even stumbled across a playground overtaken by vines, swings swaying gently in the wind, the rusted slide gleaming faintly beneath the moonlight. She sat there for hours, imagining what it would have been like if children still played there, if she could have joined them. The laughter in her mind was almost real, and though it stung to remember what she had lost, it also gave her a glimpse of hope that joy could still exist in some form. Yet loneliness followed her everywhere. She saw people from time to time, wandering survivors, groups huddled together for warmth and protection. From a distance, she would watch them, mothers carrying children, old men leaning on sticks, teenagers armed with scavenged weapons. She longed to walk into their circle, to sit by their fires, to hear their voices. But every time she tried, it ended the same. Someone would notice her teeth, the glow of her eyes, the unnatural aura that clung to her. Fear spread through them like wildfire. They whispered words like monster and demon, and Marceline would turn away, pretending she didn't care, though inside she felt her heart break a little more each time. She began to tell herself stories to make the loneliness easier. When she sang, she imagined that someone was listening. When she played her makeshift instruments, she pictured audiences clapping, cheering, smiling at her. Her songs were soft at first, shy and uncertain, but slowly they grew stronger. She learned how to pour her feelings into them, her grief, her longing, her hope. The Wastelands became her stage, the stars her only audience. And though no one was there to applaud, her own heart found comfort in the music. The creatures she encountered grew stranger as she ventured deeper. Some were terrifying beasts with too many eyes, insects the size of wolves, birds that screamed like people in the night. Others were oddly gentle, approaching her with curiosity instead of hostility. She once shared a fire with a deer that had a second face hidden on its chest, its strange double gaze watching her as she sang. It didn't harm her, and she didn't harm it. For that night, at least, she wasn't alone. Through all of this, Marceline was growing older, though time meant little in the Wastelands. She wasn't quite the small child Simon had carried anymore. Her steps were stronger, her instincts sharper. She was learning not just how to survive, but how to live in a world that was becoming less human with every passing day. And though she did not know it yet, these lonely wanderings were preparing her for the battles and transformations that lay in her future. Still, even as she walked across endless plains and through forests where the trees bent toward her like watchers, Marceline carried the same wish in her heart: to find someone who wouldn't leave, to find someone who would look past her teeth, her bloodline, her strangeness, and simply see her as Marceline. Marceline's wandering carried her far from the ruins she once knew. The Wastelands stretched on endlessly, reshaped by the old world's destruction. Some days she traveled through plains of gray dust, where no grass dared grow, the silence broken only by her own footsteps crunching against the ground. Other days, she found herself beneath skies thick with ash, where even the sun struggled to shine, its light pale and weak, as though the world itself was tired. There were moments when she thought about stopping, finding a place to claim, some corner of this ruined land to call her own. But the world never stayed still long enough. Strange storms would roll in without warning, lightning crackling green across the clouds. Once she hid inside a half-collapsed gas station, while rain the color of rust poured down in sheets, burning holes in the ground where it landed. Another time, she saw a tornado of glowing energy sweep across the horizon, pulling entire trees into the sky as if they were weightless. The land was unstable, dangerous, restless. To remain in one place for too long felt like tempting fate. So she kept walking, singing to herself to fill the silence. Her voice echoed over the emptiness, carried by winds that seemed to stretch for miles. Sometimes she pretended the wasteland was answering back, that the whispers in the air were other voices calling to her. It was a lonely game, but it kept her spirit alive. Despite the danger, Marceline found treasures scattered across the ruins of the old world. A cracked guitar leaning against a wall in an abandoned club. A pile of comic books half buried in sand, their pages faded, but still full of heroes and villains. An old Walkman with no batteries, which she wore anyway, pretending she could still hear music playing through its broken headphones. Each discovery was a reminder that the world had not always been empty. that once people laughed and played and sang. And though they were gone, Marceline carried those pieces with her, weaving them into the story of who she was becoming. The creatures of the Wastelands were unpredictable. Some were savage and hunted without hesitation, forcing her to defend herself with makeshift weapons or by simply running as fast as she could. Others seemed just as lost as she was. She remembered stumbling across a herd of enormous lizards, their scales glowing faintly in the dark. They made no move to attack her, only watched with wide, unblinking eyes as she passed. For a moment she felt almost comforted, as though, even in this twisted world, she could still find something gentle. But not all encounters were harmless. One night she was awoken by a pack of dog-like beasts prowling near her campfire. Their bodies were twisted, their jaws far too wide, lined with teeth like jagged glass. Their growls sent chills through her, and for a moment, fear froze her where she sat. Then instinct took over. She grabbed a rusted piece of rebar from her side and swung wildly, her small frame filled with a strength born of desperation. The creatures scattered, leaving her panting and shaking beside the dying fire. It was a victory, but one that reminded her just how fragile she still was. She began to learn caution, to travel under the cover of night when she could, to hide when she heard footsteps that were not her own, to listen carefully to the world around her, because sometimes danger announced itself in whispers long before it arrived. These lessons hardened her, slowly shaping her into someone who could endure. Yet for all the harshness, there were still fleeting moments of peace. She recalled lying on a hilltop beneath a rare clear sky, the stars spilling endlessly above her. For the first time in a long while, she let herself dream. She imagined that Simon was lying beside her, pointing out constellations, inventing names for the ones he didn't recognize. She imagined laughter drifting through the air, soft and warm. When tears pricked at her eyes, she let them fall freely, her voice rising in a quiet song that carried upward into the night. The Wastelands, for once, seemed to listen kindly. Her journey through this shifting land was not just about survival, it was about identity. Marceline was beginning to understand that she was not like the other people she saw from a distance. She wasn't fully human, nor did she feel like the monsters that prowled the dark. She existed in a space between undefined and uncertain. That uncertainty frightened her, but it also gave her strength. She could choose who she wanted to be, even in a world that had lost so much. And so she walked on, carrying music in her heart, memories in her hands, and hope fragile, flickering, but unbroken in her soul. The Wastelands were never the same from one horizon to the next. Sometimes Marceline wandered into places where the earth itself seemed alive, shifting and groaning as if restless beneath her feet. Once she came across a valley where enormous roots had pushed up through the ground, twisting into the sky like the bones of some long-dead giant. The roots pulsed faintly with light, and though she didn't know why, she felt certain they had been changed by the fallout of the war. It was a reminder that the world was not only broken, but mutating into something unrecognizable. In places like these, Marceline's imagination kept her company. She would name the strange landscapes, inventing stories about how they came to be. The valley of glowing roots became the forest that wanted to grow too tall, a place where trees had dreamed of reaching the stars. A cracked desert filled with glass-like shards became the mirror field, where she pretended each fragment reflected memories of the people who once lived there. These games gave her a sense of control over the chaos, as if by naming things, she could shape them into something less frightening. Food was always a challenge. In the earliest years, she scavenged what she could from the remains of the old world cans of beans, dried fruit sealed in forgotten stores, candy bars tucked into vending machines that still stood like rusted sentinels. Over time, though, those supplies became harder to find. She tried eating strange plants that grew in the soil, some glowing faintly, some curling like fists. Sometimes they filled her belly. Sometimes they made her sick for days. Hunger taught her resilience, but also desperation. And it was in those desperate hours that her strange, half-demonic heritage stirred. She found herself drawn to the sight of creatures, their warmth pulsing beneath their skin. Though she didn't fully understand it yet, something inside her whispered that she could feed in a way others could not. Still, Marceline resisted those whispers. She clung to what Simon had taught her, to the memory of sitting by fires and eating simple meals together. To give in too soon felt like betraying that bond. So she pushed the thought aside, surviving however she could, though the ache in her stomach sometimes grew unbearable. Loneliness often pressed in, heavier than hunger. On the rare occasions, she saw other people's survivors scattered across the wastes. She stayed hidden. They were often rough, ragged figures, clutching weapons and speaking in harsh tones. Marceline learned to study them from afar. Some looked kind enough, sitting together in small circles, sharing laughter even in the ruins. Others were cruel, scavenging violently from anyone weaker than themselves. To approach them would mean risking everything, and so she chose distance, though her heart ached for companionship. One of the most haunting encounters came when she stumbled into what had once been a neighborhood. Rows of houses stood half destroyed, their windows blown out, their doors hanging loosely. Inside, toys were scattered across floors. Photographs clung to walls by yellowed tape, and clothing lay folded neatly on dusty beds. Marceline wandered through in silence, her boots echoing faintly. She picked up a small stuffed rabbit with one ear missing, holding it in her arms for a while before setting it gently back on the ground. The houses felt like ghosts, not haunted by spirits, but by the weight of absence. She left the neighborhood quietly, humming a lullaby Simon once sang to her. Sometimes, though, her wandering brought wonder. In the middle of a cracked desert plain, she found a lake that shimmered with colors like melted glass. Its waters were strange, thick with glowing minerals, but in its reflection she saw herself clearer than she had in years. Her hair wild, her eyes dark and thoughtful, her small figure wrapped in layers of scavenged clothing. For the first time, she studied herself and wondered who she was really becoming. She dipped her hand into the glowing water, watched the ripples distort her face, and whispered to the reflection, asking it for answers she knew it couldn't give. Nights remained the hardest. Though she could fend off creatures and storms, she could not fend off memories. Simon's voice lingered at the edge of her thoughts. The memory of his laughter, his calm explanations about the world, his promises to protect her, they all returned when the stars came out. She often carried on imaginary conversations with him, asking questions and answering them in his voice. At times she could almost believe he was still there, walking beside her through the ruins. But when morning came, the silence reminded her that she was alone once more. Over time, Marceline's music began to shift. Where once her songs had been gentle, like the lullabies Simon sang, now they carried sharper notes. Her voice grew stronger, tinged with sadness and anger, as though the wastelands themselves were shaping her sound. She used whatever instruments she could find, strings of wire stretched across broken wood, drums fashioned from old cans, even just her voice echoing into the emptiness. The songs gave her release, transforming pain into something that could survive outside her heart. And though no one else was there to hear them, Marceline's songs filled the wastelands with a kind of presence. The silence didn't feel quite so oppressive when her voice carried across it. Sometimes she imagined that maybe, just maybe, someone far away might catch the faintest sound of her music and know that they weren't alone either. As months bled into years, Marceline began to understand the rhythm of the wastelands. They had their own seasons, their own moods. Some stretches of time were strangely calm. Skies painted soft pinks, as if the world itself had paused to breathe. In those moments, she could almost forget the destruction that surrounded her. Other times, the skies raged black with storms that carried ash and lightning, forcing her to take shelter in caves or beneath broken rooftops. Each storm felt like the world was remembering its own death and screaming about it all over again. Through all of this, Marceline grew tougher. Her shoes wore down, and she learned to craft new ones from scraps of leather and cloth. Her body adapted to the endless walking, to carrying what little she owned on her back. She stopped crying when she skinned her knees or when hunger gnawed at her too long. Even her fear began to fade. She knew now how to spot danger before it struck, how to disappear into shadows before anyone noticed her, how to wait until predators passed. The wastelands were cruel, but they had made her sharp, observant, and unyielding. Yet despite her strength, the ache of loneliness never fully left. One evening she came across a hollowed-out building where someone had scribbled words across the walls. They weren't messages of survival or warnings of danger, but songs, verse after verse painted in charcoal and ink, some hopeful, others sorrowful. Marceline traced the words with her fingers, mouthing them quietly. Whoever had written them was long gone, but their voice still lingered here in ink. It was a revelation for her. Maybe music wasn't just about comforting herself. Maybe it was about leaving something behind, a trace for others to find when she was gone. That night she sang those words to the wastelands, blending her own melody with someone else's forgotten lyrics. The sound carried into the dark, and for once, she didn't feel like she was singing only for herself. Sometimes the wasteland surprised her with strange companionship. Animals mutated by fallout dogs with too many eyes, birds with shimmering feathers, even lizards that glowed faintly in the dark crossed her path. Most were wary, skittering away the moment she approached, but once a small dog with patches of fur missing followed her for days. She named him Scraps. He was quiet, watchful, never coming too close, but always trotting just behind her. Marceline pretended he was her bodyguard, whispering silly orders to him as if they were adventuring together. One morning, Scraps was gone, disappeared into the endless horizon. She cried, though she told herself not to, because she knew the wastelands didn't let anything stay forever. The wastelands also tested her spirit with temptation. Hunger, exhaustion, and the endless solitude sometimes pushed her close to surrender. On one of her darkest nights, shivering beneath a ruined bridge as the rain poured down, she thought about giving up. She imagined lying still and letting the storm carry her away, finally resting instead of fighting. But something in her heart refused. It was the memory of Simon's voice telling her stories, the way his eyes had always softened when he looked at her. It was the stubborn spark of a child who wanted to prove she could survive, no matter what the world threw at her. She forced herself up, dragged her aching body back onto the road, and kept walking. With time, Marceline became not just a survivor, but an explorer of ruins. She mapped places in her mind, remembered landmarks, connected paths between old cities and broken highways. She began to understand the scale of the destruction, how far it stretched, how total it was. She was one of the very few left to see what had become of the world after the Mushroom War. And in that strange way, she felt like a witness. Her eyes carried history, even if no one else would ever ask her to tell it. Despite the ruins, small glimpses of beauty broke through. In the middle of a dead forest, she saw fireflies gathering in such numbers that the night glowed brighter than day. On a lonely mountaintop, she discovered fields of wildflowers blooming defiantly through cracks in the stone. Once, while hiding from a storm, she caught sight of a rainbow stretching across a blackened horizon. Each time, she whispered a quiet thank you to the world, as if it had offered her a secret gift. Her songs grew richer with these moments. They were no longer just lullabies of sorrow, but carried pieces of wonder, bits of hope stitched into melodies of loss. The Wastelands had become her stage, her audience the winds and the stars, her legacy the echo of her voice against mountains and ruins. And slowly, without even realizing it, Marceline was becoming something more than the lonely child Simon had left behind. She was becoming the Marceline we would one day know, resilient, sharp-witted, deeply emotional, and endlessly creative. The Wastelands had tried to break her, but instead, they shaped her into someone unforgettable. By the time she left the emptiest stretches of those lands behind, she carried scars both seen and unseen. But she also carried songs, strength, and a will that no desolate world could extinguish. The Wastelands had been her crucible, and from them she emerged, not just alive, but transformed. After wandering the Wastelands for so long, Marceline carried with her a strength that few children could ever imagine. But strength alone wasn't enough to fill the silence of her world. She had survived loneliness, hunger, and storms, yet a darker test waited on the horizon. It was not the empty ruins or the howling winds that would truly change her. It was the monsters who still roamed the earth, creatures shaped by the fallout, creatures that fed on blood and shadows, the vampires. Their legend had been whispered across the ruins even before Marceline ever laid eyes on them. Survivors scrawled warnings on cracked walls and muttered stories around their fires. Pale hunters who could walk under the moon and drain the life from entire villages, fangs flashing like knives, eyes glowing red in the dark. Marceline had brushed these tales aside at first, chalking them up to the fears of frightened people. But she would soon learn that they were real, terrifyingly real, and her life was about to be entangled with them forever. The first time Marceline encountered a vampire, she was still only a child. She had found temporary shelter in the ruins of an old grocery store. The building smelled of mildew, its aisles choked with collapsed shelves and half-rotted cans. That night, when the moonlight cut through the broken windows, she felt the air change. It grew heavier, colder, as though something had drawn the warmth from the space around her. A shadow stretched across the walls impossibly long, and then she saw it. A figure drifting between the aisles, pale and gaunt, with eyes that gleamed like burning coals. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought it would give her away. The creature sniffed the air, its lips curling into a grin that revealed sharp, glistening teeth. Marceline had no weapons, no plan, nothing but instinct. She clutched her toy Hambo, holding it as if it could somehow shield her from the terror standing only a few steps away. She did what she always did when fear threatened to swallow her. She sang. Her voice was small, trembling at first, but it rose through the silence of the ruined store. The vampire froze, its eyes narrowed, confused, as if no one had ever dared to sing in its presence. Marceline took the chance to slip away, her footsteps quick but quiet, her song still carrying softly behind her. That night she learned something important. Fear could paralyze, but it could also protect. Music was not just comfort anymore, it was power. Encounters like this didn't stay rare. As she grew older, vampires became an unavoidable part of her journey. Each one was different, with its own hunger, its own cruelty. Some stalked her from the shadows, others attacked outright. The Wastelands might have scarred her, but these battles carved deeper marks into her heart. She was forced to fight back, forced to defend herself against beings who seemed stronger, faster, and merciless. Marceline began to carry weapons scavenged from the ruins. Broken steel, sharpened stakes, even a battered axe she found buried in rubble. At first, she swung them with desperation, clumsy and wild. But over time, she learned. Each fight became a grim lesson. She learned where vampires were weakest, how to use their arrogance against them, how to stand her ground even when she was terrified. Her songs turned into war cries, haunting melodies that rattled through empty streets as she fought to survive. Yet fighting vampires was not only about survival, it was also about identity. With every battle, Marceline saw a reflection of herself in them. She had inherited something from her demon father, a darkness that whispered at the edges of her being. She wasn't human in the way other children were. She wasn't fragile or fleeting. And the vampire seemed to sense it too. When they looked at her, it wasn't always hunger in their eyes. Sometimes it was recognition. A kind of acknowledgement that she belonged in some way to their world of shadows. This realization frightened her more than their fangs ever could. What if she was destined to become like them, a monster prowling the night? What if the Wastelands weren't shaping her into a hero, but into something far more terrible? Marceline carried these questions in her heart as heavily as any weapon, and they followed her from fight to fight, year after year. The more Marceline encountered the vampires, the more she realized they were not mindless predators. They had personalities, goals, even twisted philosophies about life after the war. Some saw themselves as kings of the Wastelands, rulers of the broken world where humanity had already failed. Others drifted like lonely hunters, feeding only when their hunger became unbearable. Marceline quickly learned that not all vampires could be treated the same way. Some would attack without hesitation, while others wanted to toy with her first, circling her like wolves playing with their prey. One vampire in particular left an unforgettable mark on her. He was tall and gaunt, with a cape stitched together from scraps of fabric, and he spoke in a voice that was calm, almost polite. He called himself the Fool, though there was nothing foolish about him. He taunted her during their first fight, circling her in the ruins of a playground, claiming he could sense the royal darkness inside her. He told her she would never escape what she was, that she would one day thirst for the same things he did. Marceline struck him down with a sharpened stake, but his words clung to her long after the battle. These encounters began to pile up until fighting vampires was no longer a rare event, but a way of life. They haunted the Wastelands like a plague, and the survivors whispered about them with a mixture of fear and despair. To Marceline, though, they became something else, a challenge to face head-on. Each vampire was stronger than the last, but each fight hardened her. The scared little girl who once sang to distract a monster in a grocery store was slowly vanishing. In her place, a warrior was beginning to take shape. But even as she grew stronger, the loneliness never left her. Every time she struck down a vampire, she thought about how much she longed for someone to fight beside her. She carried Hembo, her stuffed toy, not just as a reminder of Simon, but as a stand-in for the companionship she desperately missed. Sometimes she would whisper to Hembo after a battle, telling him about the way the vampire moved, or how close she had come to losing. The Wastelands had no one else to listen, so her voice filled the silence, turning scraps of cloth and stuffing into her confidant. It was during these years that her songs also began to change. They weren't just lullabies anymore, or tunes to comfort herself when storms rattled broken rooftops. They became ballads of survival, battle hymns filled with the echoes of blood and fire. Sometimes she sang them while stalking vampires through the ruins, her voice echoing off cracked walls, daring them to come out and face her. Other times, she sang in the aftermath, sitting among the ashes of a fight, her voice breaking with exhaustion and grief. These songs became her way of carrying memory forward, of making sure that, even in a world swallowed by silence, her story would not vanish. There was also a strange irony to these years. The vampires that tried to end her life were, without knowing it, shaping her destiny. They pushed her to master her powers, to understand the strange inheritance of strength she carried from her father, and to find courage even when her hands trembled. Without them, she might have remained a wandering child. With them, she was becoming something else entirely, something legendary. Yet for all her victories, Marceline could never quite escape the feeling that she was walking down a long, dark corridor with no exit. The more vampires she defeated, the more appeared, as though the Wastelands themselves were spawning them endlessly. Each fight left her more scarred, more weary, and though she triumphed again and again, she began to wonder if there would ever be an end. Could she really kill them all? Or would she simply wear herself down until the night finally claimed her? As time went on, the vampires began to feel less like scattered predators and more like an organized storm. Marceline noticed patterns in their movements. Some traveled in packs, herding survivors like livestock to feed on at their leisure. Others ruled over small patches of the wastelands as if they were kings and queens demanding tribute from the terrified remnants of humanity. The more Marceline watched, the more she understood that she wasn't just fighting individual monsters. She was standing against an entire rising power. Her battles grew longer, bloodier. Each vampire had its own strange gift. One could vanish into shadow. Another could harden its skin like stone. Another could cause storms that ripped through ruined buildings. Marceline was forced to adapt, learning quickly that brute strength wasn't enough. She had to be clever, unpredictable. She used the environment against them, collapsing walls, luring them into flooded tunnels, or ambushing them with sharpened debris scavenged from the ruins. Every fight was a test. Every victory paid for with bruises, cuts, and exhaustion. And still, with every victory, she felt herself changing. Feeding on vampires to take their power became less of a desperate act and more of a deliberate choice. At first she hated it. The taste of their essence was bitter, foul, like swallowing ashes. But over time, she realized it made her stronger, sharper, able to stand against even the most powerful of them. The shame that followed each feeding gnawed at her, yet she couldn't deny what it gave her. She began to wonder if Simon had known this day would come, if he had seen that one day she would stand at a crossroads, forced to embrace a part of herself she never wanted to accept. In the stillness between battles, those doubts crept into her like poison. She remembered the words of the fool, the vampire who had taunted her about the darkness inside. She remembered her father, too, and the way his shadow had always loomed over her life, even when he was nowhere to be found. Was she becoming him? Was every fight, every feeding, just another step toward losing herself? The Wastelands gave her no answers. They only offered more enemies. One night, while wandering through the skeletal remains of a burned-out city, Marceline stumbled upon a group of humans barricaded inside an old subway station. They had rigged traps at the entrance, makeshift defenses built from scrap metal and broken glass. For a moment she thought about walking past, keeping herself apart from their fragile, fleeting lives. But their cries for help reached her, carried on the stale air of the tunnels. Vampires had found them, circling like vultures, waiting for the right moment to strike. Marceline fought that night harder than she ever had before. The narrow tunnels echoed with shrieks and the clash of steel, her axe swinging in deadly arcs as she drove the vampires back into the dark. When it was over, the humans stared at her with a mixture of awe and fear. They had never seen anyone fight like that. They called her a hero, their protector. But Marceline didn't feel like one. She felt the sting of her wounds, the ache of hunger in her chest, and the heavy weight of what she had become. She stayed with the survivors for a short time, helping them scavenge supplies, teaching them how to defend themselves. For the first time in years, she felt a hint of connection, the warmth of being part of something bigger than her own endless wandering. But she also saw the way they looked at her when they thought she wasn't paying attention, the way they whispered about her strange powers, about the unnatural glow in her eyes after battle. Fear always lingered beneath their gratitude, and Marceline knew it was only a matter of time before they pushed her away. When that day came, it broke her heart more than she expected. They told her she was too dangerous, that she brought trouble wherever she went, that the vampires followed her like hounds chasing blood. She wanted to argue, to tell them she had saved their lives more times than they could count. But deep down, she knew they weren't wrong. Wherever she went, chaos followed. So she left without a word, disappearing into the wastelands once again, her songs heavier, her silence deeper. It was after this parting that Marceline began to embrace solitude completely. She stopped seeking out survivors, stopped hoping for companionship. The wastelands became her home, the ruins her battleground. She walked from shattered city to scorched forest, leaving trails of ash and dust in her wake. The vampires feared her now, whispering about the girl with the axe who hunted them, the half-demon who could not be killed. But even fear couldn't stop them. For every vampire she struck down, another seemed to rise, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the line between hunter and hunted began to blur. The vampire years stretched on like an endless winter, cold and merciless. Marceline grew older, though not in the way ordinary people did. Her body no longer carried the fragility of mortality, but her heart, her soul, those bore the weight of years far heavier than her face ever showed. She was a child no longer, yet not fully grown in spirit. She was caught between worlds, half human, half demon, and now bound by the cursed hunger of a vampire. It was during this time that she first encountered the vampire court. These were not ordinary predators scouring the ruins. They were the great ones, the ancients whose names carried dread like thunder rolling across the land. The Fool, the Empress, the Hierophant, the Moon, and finally, the King himself. Each was more than just a vampire. They were symbols of what vampirism had become in the New World. A kingdom of shadows clawing its way out of the ashes of the Mushroom War. Facing them was not just survival, it was destiny. The Fool had been her first test, a battle that revealed the strangeness of vampire powers and the truth of her own dark inheritance. But the others, they were worse. The Empress could bend minds with her voice, twisting the will of survivors, forcing them to kneel or even turn against one another. The Hierophant could walk through walls, slipping past defenses as though stone were nothing but mist. The Moon's body was impenetrable, her pale skin harder than steel, her presence a constant reminder of inevitability, like the pull of gravity. And towering above them all was the king, a warrior whose very blood seemed to pulse with dominion, a tyrant who ruled the others with an iron grip. Marceline hunted them one by one, each battle draining her further, pushing her deeper into the chasm of loneliness and power. To defeat them, she had to consume them, drinking their essence, absorbing their abilities. With each feeding, she gained strength. But she also lost something, pieces of herself chipped away, fragments of innocence burned to ash. She told herself it was for survival, that Simon would have wanted her to keep going, that the humans who still lived needed someone to stand between them and the dark. But in the quiet after victory, she often stared into the reflection of her axe blade and wondered if the person looking back was still truly her. And yet there were moments of strange beauty in this bleak time, and nights when she sang to herself under the broken sky, her voice carrying across the ruins like a ghost of the old world. The stars above, though dimmed by fallout and dust, still sparkled faintly, and she found comfort in them. They reminded her of Simon, of how he had always looked to the skies with longing, dreaming of things far beyond the world. In those moments, she could almost feel him beside her again, guiding her, whispering words of encouragement she could no longer hear. The vampire years were not just about blood and battle. They were about identity, about Marceline learning to define herself in a world that constantly tried to pull her into roles she didn't choose. Demon, vampire, monster, hero, destroyer. Everyone who saw her gave her a different name, a different story. But she longed to just be Marceline, a girl with a base, a heart full of complicated love, and a soul that craved both belonging and freedom. Her greatest test came with the Vampire King. The battle is etched into her memory like fire on stone. The king was unlike any foe she had faced, not just in power but in wisdom. He was ancient, cunning, and strangely calm. Where others snarled and attacked with reckless hunger, he spoke, he reasoned, he tried to persuade. He told Marceline that vampires were the future, that humanity was fading, that she had a place at his side as something greater than she could ever be alone. His words tempted her, striking at the doubts that already gnawed at her. For a moment she wondered if he was right, if resisting him was nothing but delaying the inevitable. But in the end, Marceline chose to fight. She fought with every ounce of strength, every memory of Simon's care, every spark of humanity she still clung to. The battle was long, brutal, shaking the very earth with its ferocity. When the dust settled, Marceline stood victorious, but victory came with a price. Absorbing the Vampire King's essence filled her with a power unlike anything she had ever known, and with it, a terrifying clarity. She was no longer just fighting vampires. She was fighting herself, the part of her that wanted to give in, to surrender to the darkness and the hunger. That victory marked the end of the vampire court, but it also marked the end of something in Marceline. The years of fighting had stripped away her childhood, leaving behind a survivor, a warrior, and someone who no longer knew how to belong anywhere. She wandered the wastelands after that battle, her songs tinged with sorrow and rage, her heart carrying both triumph and loss. This was the long descent into the vampire years, a time when Marceline became both legend and ghost, a savior to some, a monster to others and to herself. A lonely soul drifting through the wreckage of a world that had already ended once before. And though those years shaped her into the powerful, sharp-witted, emotionally complex vampire queen we would one day meet in Ooh, they also left scars that never truly healed. The echoes of that time lingered in her music, in her friendships, and in the quiet pain she carried beneath her playful, sometimes cynical exterior. Marceline survived the vampire years, but survival, as she would come to learn, does not mean escaping unscathed. It means living with the shadows that never fully fade. Our journey with Marceline now drifts into a chapter both tender and haunting. After years of battling monsters and surviving the Wastelands, Marceline found herself carrying not just the weight of survival, but the longing for connection. For centuries, her story is not only one of endurance, but of the fleeting bonds she forged along the way. Some bright and warm, others brief as candle flames. Tonight we step into those moments of companionship, those shadows that kept her company through the long march of time. When you live for hundreds of years, you begin to notice how fragile other lives are. For Marceline, every friendship, every romance, every small act of kindness she shared was shadowed by the knowledge that she would outlast it. That doesn't mean she avoided people. Quite the opposite. She was drawn to them, hungry for warmth and conversation. But she also braced herself for the inevitable ending each connection carried. In the centuries following the vampire wars, Marceline wandered not only through landscapes, but through circles of companionship. She would drift into the lives of others and, for a while, weave herself into their stories. Sometimes as a protector, sometimes as a misfit, sometimes as a friend. Imagine her walking into a crumbled town, children scattering at the sight of her floating through the air, only for her to later sit with them by a fire telling silly stories or humming songs on her bass. There's a strange tenderness in those moments, the way she balanced her dark, intimidating exterior with a heart that craved closeness. Among the most important of these bonds was her time with Simon, long after he had fully become the Ice King. Though their closeness from her childhood had faded into something fragmented, Marceline's heart still held space for him. She would sometimes visit him in the Ice Kingdom, though their conversations were fractured, his mind buried beneath the crown's curse. There are hints, in little moments, that he still remembered her in flashes. A fleeting recognition in his eyes, a word or phrase that sounded more like Simon than Ice King. For Marceline, those moments must have been bittersweet. They reminded her of the man who once cradled her in the ruins of a shattered city, the man who gave her a stuffed animal to ease her loneliness. And yet, they also reminded her of how much she had lost. Beyond Simone, Marceline sought companionship in other ways. She fell into friendships with wanderers, rogues, and musicians. Music was always her anchor, a bridge she used to connect with others. In taverns built from salvaged ruins, Marceline would take the stage, her voice echoing through smoky air, her songs pulling strangers into her orbit. People were drawn to her not only because of her music, but because she carried an aura of both danger and comfort. To be near her was to feel like you were brushing against a legend. Some stayed by her side for weeks or months, others faded after a single night. Of course, not all bonds were simple friendships. Marceline, being deeply emotional and romantic, experienced love across her long years. Her most iconic romance, of course, was with Princess Bubblegum. But that story, long and tangled, belongs later in her timeline. Before that, she opened her heart to others in brief but meaningful ways. Vampires are often portrayed as cold and detached, but Marceline was the opposite. Her loves were messy, vulnerable, and often painful. Imagine her holding someone close in the quiet of a ruined city, whispering about dreams of building a safe place together, knowing in her heart that such dreams rarely lasted. Sometimes it was her nature that ended things. Sometimes it was simply time. People grew old, they changed, they moved on. And Marceline remained, carrying the echoes of those bonds with her. Loss was the inevitable shadow of companionship. For every friend she made, She would eventually stand over their grave or watch them walk away. It hardened her, yes, but it also gave her songs their soul. The melancholy in Marceline's music doesn't come from thin air. It's a record of centuries of fleeting love, laughter, and goodbyes. When she sings about being left behind, about wanting to feel whole, she is singing not just about one heartbreak, but about dozens, layered across generations. Her companions often saw her as a mystery. She never revealed all of herself, never told the full story of her childhood, the Mushroom War, or her battles with the vampires. Instead, she allowed others to know her in fragments, through laughter, songs, and shared nights. That distance was her way of protecting herself, because to tell her whole story would mean facing the unbearable weight of it. As we drift deeper into this chapter, we'll look more closely at those shadows of companionship, the wanderers who shared her fire, the fleeting romances that touched her heart, and the deeper, enduring threads like Simon and bubblegum that continued to define her for centuries. Marceline's story is not just one of survival against monsters in the wastelands, but survival through the constant ache of loneliness, softened only by the fragile beauty of connection. One of the gentlest truths about Marceline is that she never stopped trying, even when she knew loss was inevitable. Where some immortals in fiction grow cold and detached, Marceline leaned into her humanity. She laughed easily, teased those she cared for, and gave herself permission to feel deeply. In this way, her relationships became both her greatest source of strength and her most vulnerable wound. During her wandering years, she found herself building temporary families. Sometimes it was a small group of survivors she protected from danger. Other times it was fellow travelers who roamed the wastelands with her, their campfires glowing under broken skies. These groups never lasted forever, but they shaped her. Imagine Marceline sitting cross-legged with a group of misfits, strumming her bass while voices joined her in a rough, unpolished chorus. In those moments, she wasn't a lonely vampire queen. She was just Marcy, surrounded by laughter, belonging to something bigger than herself, even if it only lasted a season. There's a tenderness in the way she chose to stay soft despite her long life. To live for centuries and still allow yourself to love means choosing vulnerability again and again. She could have hidden in her cave, cut herself off from the pain of attachment. But that wasn't her way. For Marceline, companionship was as essential as music. It was what reminded her that she was still alive in more than just body. Of course, some of those connections grew deeper than simple friendship. Marceline's romantic relationships, though often fleeting, left deep marks on her heart. Many of these partners remain unnamed, glimpses at best, whispered across Adventure Time's fragmented storytelling. Yet what we do know is enough to paint a picture of someone who never stopped searching for love. It's worth remembering that vampires in Uul were often feared, seen as predators. Even after Marceline ended the vampire court, suspicion lingered. This made her romances complicated, sometimes secret, sometimes strained by prejudice. Imagine what it must have felt like for her to find someone willing to look past the fangs, to see the tenderness hidden beneath the sharp grin. That trust would have been a gift, one she held on to with intensity. But as the years rolled on, she had to face the cruel truth. Her lovers aged. They withered while she remained unchanged. She could cradle them through their final years, but when they were gone, she was left carrying memories that never faded. This is where the heartache in her songs lives. Take a moment to think about the ballads she plays, the slow, aching chords that trail into silence. These aren't just songs for a teenage crush or a single heartbreak. They are songs layered with centuries of longing, of watching love slip through her fingers again and again. Every note she plays is both a memorial and a way to keep those connections alive. Oh, yet for all the sorrow, Marceline didn't allow herself to become cynical. She kept chasing connection, even when it hurt. That is perhaps one of the bravest choices of her story. Most people, when burned enough times, learn to wall themselves off. Marceline chose the opposite. She made herself available to laughter, to new bonds, to fresh heartbreaks. In a way, that resilience is her truest form of immortality, not just living forever, but continuing to love despite the pain of losing. One of the most profound connections she carried across the centuries, of course, was with Simon. Even in his broken, frozen state, he was a tether to her childhood, to the scared little girl she once was. For Marceline, spending time with him, even when he rambled nonsense, was a form of remembering who she used to be. It was grounding. It gave her continuity in a life defined by change. Her other enduring bond was with Princess Bubblegum. Though theirs was not an easy love, it was complicated, stretching across centuries, marked by passion, distance, and reconciliation. But we'll unravel that thread a little later, once their paths begin to truly intertwine. For now, what matters is the pattern. Marceline's life was a tapestry, woven from countless connections, each thread bright and fragile, each destined to fray. What makes her companionship so compelling is not their permanence, but their impermanence. They reveal a truth that echoes for all of us, even though we don't live for centuries. Every bond we form is temporary in one way or another. Marceline's story magnifies that truth until it becomes undeniable. Yet instead of recoiling from it, she embraced the fleeting beauty of these moments. To her, even a short friendship was worth carrying through eternity. Let's begin with some of Marceline's earliest bonds after the fall of the vampire court. These weren't the great romances of her story, but the kind of small, heartfelt connections that gave her stability when everything else was chaos. One such figure was a traveler named Ashley, mentioned briefly in the Adventure Time comics. Ashley wasn't powerful nor particularly famous, but she was one of those rare souls who treated Marceline as a person first, not a monster or a legend. Their companionship was light-hearted, full of shared jokes, and though the records of their time together are thin, the impression is clear. For Marceline, this was one of those periods of normalcy that she so often craved, just someone to walk with, laugh with, and share the long nights. These kinds of temporary but meaningful friendships were the lifeblood of Marceline's long existence. They were reminders that even in a strange and fractured world, companionship was still possible. She collected these memories like keepsakes, not because she needed to hold on to every detail, but because each person left her changed, softened, a little more human. Of course, there were times when companionship tipped into romance, and here the stakes grew much higher. Imagine Marceline falling in love with someone fully mortal, someone with only decades to live at best. That kind of love was like holding a flame in your hands, warming and brilliant, but impossible to keep forever. For most, the awareness of that fleetingness might lead them to avoid such entanglements. But Marceline wasn't built to avoid. She was built to dive in, even knowing the inevitable end. This is why her songs so often sound like half-memories. They carry the pulse of relationships that burned brightly and then vanished, leaving her with only the echo. One of the most haunting things about listening to her music is realizing you're hearing centuries of ghosts. Every lyric she hums, every chord she strums, could be about someone long gone, someone whose name no one remembers but her. Then there are the deeper, more central bonds, the ones that carried weight across centuries. Her bond with Simon Petrikov, for instance, cannot be overstated. To Marceline, Simon was more than a friend. He was a guardian, a father figure, and sometimes a fragile responsibility she carried on her shoulders. Even in his decline, when the crown's madness took away his ability to be the man she once knew, Marceline stayed close. She saw through the erratic words and the shivering cold to the man who once shielded her with nothing more than his own arms. Their companionship is perhaps one of the most profound examples of chosen family in adventure time. They clung to each other not out of obligation, but out of love that transcended the labels of blood or duty. And then there is Princess Bubblegum. Their story is one of the most nuanced relationships in the show, a tangle of affection, misunderstanding, distance, and reconciliation. When they were young, their bond was full of fire and energy. Marceline's wildness and Bubblegum's meticulous order seemed incompatible, and yet they sparked something powerful in each other. They argued, they laughed, they pushed each other's limits. Over time, however, cracks appeared. Bubblegum's responsibilities grew heavier, pulling her further into her role as ruler, while Marceline continued to wander, restless and unbound. Their differences, once thrilling, became sources of tension. The love was still there, but it was complicated, buried beneath frustration and years of unspoken words. This dynamic resonates with anyone who has loved someone whose life path diverged from their own. It's the ache of knowing that affection alone isn't always enough to hold two people together. The timing and circumstance matter just as much as feeling. For Marceline, losing Bubblegum, not entirely, but in those stretches when they drifted apart, was one of the deepest heartbreaks of her long life. Unlike her mortal companions, Bubblegum didn't vanish into old age and death. She remained eternal in her own way, which meant the loss was less final, but in some ways more painful. To live side by side with someone you love and yet feel distance between you, that is a wound that doesn't easily heal. Her friendships with others, like Finn and Jake, show another dimension of companionship in her story. These bonds carried none of the same tragic undertones as her romances, yet they were no less meaningful. With Finn, she found someone earnest and brave, someone who admired her without reservation. With Jake, she shared laughter and mischief, a lighter bond that cut through the heaviness of her memories. These friendships mattered because they reminded her that not every relationship had to end in tragedy. They could simply exist in joy, in shared adventures, in silly songs played in treehouse living rooms. What ties all these connections together is the way Marceline allowed herself to be vulnerable in each of them. She didn't guard herself behind walls of detachment. Even when she teased, even when she tried to appear aloof, she cared deeply. And this deep caring meant she carried losses more heavily than most. Every time someone slipped from her life, she held on to their memory through song. In many ways, her music became her true diary, a record of everyone who mattered to her. When you step back and look at this pattern, what you see is not a story about a lonely vampire, but about someone who refused to let loneliness define her. She fought against the gravity of isolation again and again by reaching out, by loving, by building friendships, no matter how fragile. This is what made Marceline not just the Vampire Queen, but a profoundly human soul in a world of chaos. As Marceline's story winds further into the timeline of Ooh, we see her relationships evolve in ways that reflect her own growth. By the time of Adventure Time's later seasons, she no longer carries the same edge of defiance that defined her early appearances. She is still witty, sarcastic, and mischievous, But her relationships show us a Marceline who has finally allowed herself to lean into vulnerability rather than resist it. The reconciliation with Princess Bubblegum is one of the clearest examples of this. After centuries of tension, drifting apart, and unspoken affection, the two finally allow themselves to bridge the gap. What's most beautiful about their reunion is that it doesn't erase the struggles of their past. They don't suddenly become perfect for each other. Instead, they accept that they are flawed, that their relationship will be messy, but that it's worth fighting for anyway. Marceline learns that love isn't about avoiding pain or preventing arguments. It's about choosing to remain through them. This is what makes her final bond with Bubblegum so powerful. It feels earned, built on centuries of mistakes and forgiveness, rather than a sudden spark of romance. Their love story carries special weight because it reflects Marceline's own journey of self-acceptance. For so long, she felt like she didn't belong anywhere, too human for the monsters, too monstrous for the humans. But with Bubblegum, she found someone who saw every side of her and still wanted to stay. In many ways, Bubblegum became the mirror Marceline needed. The proof that she was lovable, not in spite of her contradictions, but because of them. Their relationship stands as one of the most enduring symbols of Adventure Time's message, that love is about connection, not perfection. Beyond romance, Marceline's friendships continue to shine as some of her most defining anchors. Her bond with Finn is particularly important. Finn looks up to her not just as a friend, but as a kind of mentor, someone who embodies freedom and confidence. Yet what's remarkable is that Marceline learns from him too. Through Finn, she sees the value of youthful optimism, the courage to keep trying, even when things fall apart. He reminds her of her younger self before centuries of heartbreak hardened her edges. In this way, their friendship is reciprocal. She teaches him wisdom, and he reminds her how to hope. Jake, too, is a key figure in her circle. With Jake, the connection is rooted in humor and companionship without the weight of unspoken baggage. He brings levity into her world, the kind of easygoing presence that makes the burdens of immortality a little lighter. Sometimes it's easy to overlook relationships like this, the ones built on laughter and casual camaraderie. But for someone like Marceline, they are vital. They give her breathing room, moments where she doesn't have to wrestle with existential questions or carry the grief of her past. She can just hang out, play music, and be silly. Even characters who enter her life more briefly leave a mark. Think of her interactions with Lumpy Space Princess, for instance. What might seem at first like a clashing of egos actually reveals the flexibility of Marceline's companionship. She doesn't need everyone around her to be perfect. She just needs authenticity, and that's something she respects in others, no matter how messy they are. At the heart of all these connections is a central theme: Marceline's refusal to give up on love in all its forms. Many immortals in fiction are portrayed as detached, cold, unwilling to bond because of the pain of inevitable loss. Marceline is the opposite. She seeks out bonds. She risks the heartbreak. She opens herself again and again, even knowing how it might end. This willingness is what keeps her from becoming truly monstrous. It anchors her to her humanity, the fragile thread she refuses to let snap. Her songs are the most intimate window into this truth. When Marceline sings, she doesn't just entertain, she testifies. Each lyric is a fragment of her diary, each melody a tribute to someone she loved and lost. In those quiet, vulnerable moments when her voice drifts across the screen, we hear centuries of companionship echoing back. We hear Simon's protective embrace, Bubblegum's quiet presence, Finn's laughter, Jake's jokes, and the countless unnamed souls who left their fingerprints on her heart. Loss for Marceline is inevitable. But loss does not erase love. If anything, it deepens it, crystallizing the memory of companionship into something eternal. This is the lesson Marceline embodies. That relationships don't vanish when people do. They live on in stories and songs, in the ways we carry pieces of one another forward. In the end, the shadows of companionship are not dark at all. They are luminous. They remind us that every bond, no matter how fleeting, shapes who we become. Marceline stands as proof that to live fully is to risk heartbreak, to risk vulnerability, to embrace love even when it might slip away. And though she has lost more companions than most of us could imagine, she has never allowed that grief to turn her into someone bitter or closed off. She continues to sing, to laugh, to love. That is the true legacy of Marceline's companionships. Not that they ended, but that they existed, and through her music, they will never be forgotten. Marceline has always carried an aura of effortless cool. Whether she's floating lazily through the sky with her bass guitar, or teasing Finn and Jake with a smirk, there is an undeniable presence about her. She doesn't need a crown or a throne to command attention, but beneath that rebellious charm lies a truth that Adventure Time slowly unfolds. Marceline is, in fact, a queen, the Vampire Queen, a ruler who has walked through centuries of darkness, survival, and responsibility, shaping her own kind of monarchy in a world where titles often mean much less than the people who hold them. When we first hear the title Vampire Queen, it almost sounds like a joke. Marceline herself doesn't seem like the kind of person who would care about hierarchy or formal leadership. She thrives on independence, on doing things her own way. Yet her history with the vampires of Ooh reveals that this title isn't just a throwaway nickname. It is earned, battled for, and carried with a weight she often hides behind her casual demeanor. The story of Marceline becoming the Vampire Queen takes us back to her most intense and violent battles. In the miniseries Stakes, we learn that Marceline once faced the most fearsome vampires of the ancient world, each one embodying a different primal aspect of predation. There was the Vampire King, regal and calculating, the Fool, chaotic and reckless, the Hierophant, bound by rules but cruel in his enforcement of them. Each of these enemies represented not just a physical threat, but a reflection of the fears Marceline carried inside herself. By hunting them down, one by one, Marceline did more than rid the world of monsters. She absorbed their powers, adding them to her own, and in doing so became the most formidable vampire in existence. It wasn't just strength that made her the queen. It was the fact that she faced the darkest parts of her world head-on and came out alive, scarred but unbroken. To rule the night, she first had to survive it. What's striking about her reign, however, is how different it is from traditional ideas of royalty. Marceline doesn't see herself as someone meant to control others. Her queendom isn't about issuing commands or sitting above the rest. It's about standing as a symbol. To the few remaining vampires and to those who know her story, she represents survival, freedom, and defiance. She didn't inherit her throne. She carved it out with her own hands in blood and fire, in the loneliness of being both predator and protector. Marceline's reign is also deeply tied to her relationship with identity. Being the Vampire Queen doesn't erase the fact that she is also half human, half demon. She never fits neatly into one category, never claims to be entirely of one world. And maybe that is what makes her such a unique monarch, Unlike rulers who enforce boundaries and separations, Marceline embodies the breaking of them. Her queendom is not defined by territory or allegiance, but by the freedom to exist as one truly is. She reigns not by ruling over others, but by proving that one can survive and thrive in the liminal spaces where identities overlap. Still, ruling the night comes with loneliness. The battles that made her queen also isolated her. By destroying the vampires, she freed the world from their tyranny, but she also became the last of her kind. To hold the title of Vampire Queen in a world with no vampires is both triumphant and tragic. It's a crown that glitters and weighs heavily all at once. Marceline rarely speaks about this burden outright, but we see it in the quiet moments, in her songs about isolation, in her tendency to push people away before pulling them close again. Her queendom also intersects with her relationships. Princess Bubblegum, a ruler of her own people, often mirrors Marceline's struggles in very different ways. Bubblegum rules through structure, science, and careful control, while Marceline rules through instinct, emotion, and the weight of history. Where Bubblegum builds kingdoms, brick by bricks, Marceline holds hers in stories, songs, and scars. Their dynamic becomes richer when viewed through this lens. Two rulers of very different worlds, each carrying responsibilities they never asked for, yet each finding ways to support one another. As Vampire Queen, Marceline also becomes a kind of guardian of the night. Ooh is a land filled with strangeness and danger, and her presence alone serves as a deterrent to would-be threats. She doesn't parade her title, but when her powers are needed, she rises with an authority no one can question. And unlike other rulers, Marceline's authority is never forced, it is felt. Those who know her, whether friends or foes, understand instinctively that she is not someone to be underestimated. Even so, her queendom isn't about fear. If anything, it is about empathy. Despite her strength, Marceline often relates more to the vulnerable than to the powerful. She remembers being small, being abandoned, being hungry. She knows what it feels like to be powerless, and so her reign is not about domination, but about protecting the fragile threads of connection that make existence bearable. To rule the night in Marceline's way is to embrace the shadows while making sure they never swallow the light entirely. Marceline's music often becomes the truest expression of her queendom. While other rulers might rely on speeches, declarations, or laws, Marceline speaks through melody. Her songs are lullabies for the restless, anthems of rebellion, and confessions that peel back the armor she wears so easily in battle. They carry the weight of centuries, each note shaped by triumphs, betrayals, and long nights under the cold moon. Think about how her voice trembles when she sings about her father, or how it softens when she remembers her childhood with Simon. These are not the songs of someone detached from her people. They are the songs of a queen who has lived among them, who knows sorrow as well as joy, and who doesn't hide from either. In this sense, Marceline rules not through distance, but through vulnerability. By daring to share her pain, she creates bonds deeper than any decree could establish. What makes her reign especially unique is her refusal to let power corrupt her. In many stories, those who defeat great enemies and inherit their strength become consumed by it. But Marceline never loses herself to the powers she absorbs. She takes what she needs to survive, yet she holds on to her core identity, the girl who still remembers her mother's voice, the child who once clung to Simon's hand in the ruins of the old world. Even with the strength of a queen, she remains profoundly human in her emotions, her longings, and her flaws. The weight of immortality, however, cannot be ignored. As a vampire queen, Marceline walks through centuries while others around her age and pass away. This creates a strange rhythm to her life. Friendships bloom and fade. Loves are kindled and lost, and yet she endures. To rule the night is to witness time itself flowing differently. A constant reminder that permanence is an illusion. Marceline doesn't always speak about this openly, but we see the marks of immortality in her hesitation to form attachments, in her tendency to withdraw when connections become too deep. A queen of endless nights must learn to live with endless partings. Still, this same longevity gives her a perspective no one else in Ooh quite possesses. Marceline remembers the ruins left after the Mushroom War, the empty silence of broken cities. She has seen monsters rise and fall, kingdoms crumble and rebuild. This long view allows her to see beyond momentary conflicts. When others panic, Marceline waits. When others lash out, she reflects. Her queendom is not built on urgency, but on endurance, the slow, patient understanding that everything changes, and that survival means adapting with it. It's fascinating to compare her queendom with other monarchs in Ooh. Princess Bubblegum commands through intellect and governance. The Flame Princess rules with fiery passion and volatile strength, and even the Ice King, in his own tragic way, clings to the idea of control through obsession. Marceline, by contrast, rules by simply existing as herself. Her queendom isn't enforced with walls, armies, or bureaucracy. It radiates from her presence, from her choices, from the way she stands firm against darkness without ever letting it consume her. She is proof that power doesn't always require dominance. Sometimes it requires nothing more than authenticity. And yet Marceline's reign is not static. Over the course of Adventure Time, we see her grow from someone reluctant to even acknowledge her role as queen to someone who begins to accept it. She doesn't wear the crown lightly, nor does she flaunt it. But she comes to understand that the title of Vampire Queen is more than just a reminder of her battles. It is a responsibility to protect the balance she fought so hard to achieve. By the end of Stakes, we don't just see a warrior who has defeated her enemies. We see a queen who has embraced the night as her domain, who has accepted that her identity, fractured as it may be, is her greatest source of strength. Her queendom is also deeply personal. In another way, it allows her to rewrite the story of vampires in Ooh, where once they symbolized terror, domination, and endless hunger, Marceline transforms the meaning of what it means to be a vampire. She becomes a guardian rather than a predator, a symbol of coexistence rather than destruction. Her reign redefines an entire species, turning what was once feared into something that can inspire. Few rulers in any kingdom can claim to have reshaped history in such a profound way. But perhaps the most beautiful part of her reign is that she never forgets the human side of herself. When Marceline strums her guitar and sings about lost love, when she floats quietly above the city lights at night, when she laughs with Finn and Jake over silly adventures, these are the moments where we see the true essence of her queendom. It is not about ruling subjects or holding territory. It is about surviving the night with one's soul intact, about finding light in the darkness, and about teaching others that even in a world shaped by ruin, joy, and connection are still possible. To understand Marceline's reign more deeply, we should look at the ways she interacts with other rulers and kingdoms across Ooh. Unlike most queens, she does not seek political alliances or treaties. Her connections are far more personal. Take her relationship with Princess Bubblegum, for example. While the two often clash over differences in temperament, Bubblegum being meticulous, logical, and calculated, while Marceline is emotional, instinct-driven, and improvisational, their bond demonstrates how power does not have to be uniform to be effective. In fact, their contrasting approaches create a balance. Bubblegum governs by the laws of science and structure, while Marceline governs by the laws of the heart. Together, they form a kind of yin and yang, two forces whose strength lies in complementing each other's weaknesses. This dynamic is one of the reasons why Marceline is so beloved not only by fans of the show, but also within the world of OO itself. She does not rule to dominate, but to connect. She listens, she feels, and she understands. Her subjects, if they can even be called that, know that she does not stand above them, but alongside them. She is approachable, often more comfortable playing her bass guitar in a cave than sitting on a throne in a grand hall. Her very refusal to embody traditional notions of royalty is what makes her reign resonate so strongly. The night itself, in many ways, is her true kingdom. Marceline embodies the duality of night. It is a time of fear and mystery for some, but also a time of peace, reflection, and intimacy for others. The stars scattered across the sky, the stillness of the world, the quiet hum of crickets, these are her allies as much as any creature or friend. By ruling the night, she rules over the liminal space where imagination comes alive and where people's truest thoughts surface. Her queendom is not bound by walls or borders. It exists in the hearts of those who are awake when others are asleep. Her songs become almost royal decrees in this realm of darkness. When she sings, her words ripple out into the night like proclamations of truth, each one binding her subjects to her not through duty, but through shared emotion. Unlike kings who might demand loyalty through fear, or queens who demand respect through majesty, Marceline invites loyalty by opening her soul. It's a softer, quieter kind of power, but it's also one of the strongest. Marceline's queendom also thrives on freedom. She does not bind herself to the responsibilities that typically define monarchs. There is no court, no bureaucracy, no endless meetings to attend. Instead, her rule is almost anarchic, built on the principle that true leadership does not smother the lives of others, but enriches them. She does not force people into submission. Rather, she creates space where individuals can be themselves. It is a reign built on trust, on the idea that her mere presence is enough to keep balance in place. This is an extraordinary model of leadership, one that feels radically different from the kingdoms around her. We also see how her queendom evolves through her battles. When Marceline fights, it is rarely for conquest or pride. Instead, it is for survival, for protection, or for justice. Her victories do not expand her dominion, but instead preserve her freedom and the safety of those around her. This approach highlights a key aspect of her reign. Her queendom is not about taking, but about keeping. She fights not to build an empire, but to safeguard the fragile connections she has managed to hold on to across the centuries. This brings us back to one of the most poignant aspects of her character, her immortality. A queen who will live forever carries a different kind of burden than one who reigns for a single lifetime. Marceline knows that no matter how strong her relationships, time will eventually pull them away from her. She has lived through countless cycles of attachment and loss, and though this has hardened her in some ways, it has also made her more compassionate. She knows what it is like to be left behind, so she treasures those who stand beside her in the present. That awareness colors her reign with a kind of bittersweet wisdom. It also raises the question, what does legacy mean to someone who never dies? For most rulers, legacy is about leaving something behind after they are gone. But for Marceline, who will continue long after others have vanished. Legacy is about the moments she creates in the present. It is not the monuments or kingdoms she leaves in her wake, but the memories shared, the songs sung, and the comfort given. Her queendom is eternal not because she will live forever, but because she chooses to live each night as though it matters, weaving her immortality into something tender and meaningful rather than cold and detached. Marceline's reign also challenges our very notion of what a queen should be. She doesn't wear ornate gowns, sit on a throne of gold, or surround herself with courtiers. Instead, she wears casual clothes, floats lazily through the air, and spends her nights singing to whoever will listen. Yet this unconventional image does not weaken her authority. If anything, it strengthens it. She proves that a queen is not defined by appearances or traditions, but by the way she shapes the world around her. By being authentically herself, Marceline dismantles the expectations placed on rulers and replaces them with something far more personal and profound. Even the creatures of the night who once feared or challenged her now recognize her authority, not because she enforced it, but because she earned it. In a world where monsters and vampires once dominated through terror, Marceline stands as an antithesis, a ruler who governs with empathy and strength, whose power lies not in instilling fear, but in inspiring trust. This is what makes her reign so extraordinary. She rules by rewriting the very rules of power. In the end, Marceline's story as the Vampire Queen is not just about battles fought or titles claimed. It is about how she learned to rule herself before ruling others. Her queendom is a reflection of her inner journey, an outward expression of the balance she has found between her vampiric hunger and her human heart. Through centuries of struggle, loneliness, and love, she has crafted an identity that is wholly her own. She is not simply her father's daughter, not merely a survivor of the Mushroom War, and not only a vampire born of darkness. She is Marceline Abadir, a queen whose power lies in embracing every fragment of who she is. This is why her reign feels so personal and so resonant. Marceline does not lead by example in the traditional sense, but by vulnerability. Her songs, her stories, her moments of laughter and sadness, they all become lessons for those around her. She teaches others that even in a world reshaped by chaos and destruction, it is possible to find joy, to hold on to love, and to carry one's scars as part of one's identity rather than a mark of shame. When we imagine her sitting under a full moon, strumming her bass while the wind drifts softly across the plains of Wu, it is easy to see why she is called a queen. There is something regal in her quiet defiance, in the way she refuses to bend herself into what others expect her to be. She wears her crown not as a burden, but as an extension of her truth. And in doing so, she allows those who look up to her to feel safe in their own truths as well. It's also worth considering the way her queendom shapes the future of Wu. By embodying a different kind of leadership, Marceline inspires a world where rulers need not be distant or tyrannical, but instead compassionate and present. Her friendship with the Princess Bubblegum becomes a model of how two very different kinds of rulers can coexist and thrive. Where one governs with logic and invention, the other rules with emotion and intuition. Together, they paint a picture of a future that values harmony between strength and softness, between reason and heart. Her queendom is also a reminder of the resilience of Wu itself. Born from the ashes of a world-ending war, Marceline represents the endurance of life even after devastation. She is living proof that even in the face of darkness, whether it comes from global destruction, vampiric curses, or personal grief life finds a way not only to continue, but to bloom in unexpected ways. Her songs echo across the centuries as lullabies of survival, of love that persists, and of hope that never fully dies. And perhaps that is the greatest gift she offers to her queendom, the gift of hope. Not a loud or overwhelming hope, but a gentle one. A hope that sings softly in the night, that tells you it's okay to be afraid, it's okay to cry, and it's okay to keep going. Her reign is not defined by conquest, wealth, or grandeur, but by the quiet assurance that there is beauty even in brokenness, and light even in the darkest night. For those of us listening to her story, especially as we drift into the calm of sleep, Marceline's queendom reminds us of something deeply human, that power does not always come from control. Sometimes the greatest power comes from letting go, from being honest, and from daring to be yourself no matter how much the world tries to shape you. Marceline shows us that even the queen of the night can be tender. Even a vampire can love, and even someone burdened by immortality can still choose to live fully in every fleeting moment. So as we close this chapter of her story, imagine her now floating gently above the trees of Ooh, the moonlight glinting off her fangs as her voice carries softly into the night. Perhaps she's singing a song of love, or of loneliness, or of memories long gone. Or perhaps she's just humming to herself, content in the quiet company of the stars. This is her reign, not one of thrones and armies, but of music, memory, and the night sky. And in that gentle reign we find comfort too. Because, like her queendom, the night is not something to fear, but something to rest within. The stars are her crown, the darkness her throne, and the dreams of Ooh her loyal subjects. Marceline rules not by force, but by presence, an eternal queen of the night, guiding us not with commands, but with songs that lull the world into peace. As we drift deeper into rest, her story reminds us that even in endless time, even in the long stretch of immortality, the moments that matter most are often the smallest ones. A laugh shared with a friend, a note held in the air, a memory kept alive in the quiet of the night. These are the treasures of her queendom. And so with her voice echoing softly in our imagination, we let the night take us too, trusting that in the embrace of her reign there is nothing to fear, only dreams, only peace, and the gentle assurance that the queen of the night is watching over us, her lullabies carrying us safely into tomorrow. Every story has its beginning, its middle, and its end. But in the land of Ooh, time feels like a circle. One adventure closes only for another to open, and the road always seems to stretch further than the horizon we can see. Tonight, as we wander into this next chapter, we are stepping onto that road. A road not defined by battles or crowns, but by waiting, by searching, and by the quiet expectation of something new. Ooh itself is a land of endless transformations. From the ashes of the Mushroom War to the rise of candy kingdoms, from vampires to cosmic entities, the world has never stood still. And yet in the pauses between great upheavals, there exists a quieter story. A story of the travelers, the wanderers, and the dreamers who walk the roads, not in search of power, but in search of meaning. This is what makes the road to Ooh such an intriguing path. It is not only about where it leads, but about what it represents. For many, Ooh is more than a physical place on a map. It is an idea, a destination, where one might find belonging, a chance to start again, or perhaps a mystery waiting to be unraveled. In the stillness of the night, it is easy to imagine the countless feet that have walked those paths before, each of them carrying hopes, fears, and questions tucked quietly in their hearts. As we journey down this road, imagine the scenery. Rolling fields stretched under silver starlight, trees swaying gently as if whispering to one another. The distant glow of the Candy Kingdom's towers on the horizon, shimmering faintly like lanterns calling weary travelers home. The road is dusty in some places, broken in others, and yet it holds a certain promise. The promise that no matter how long you walk, you are moving closer to something that matters. Ooh has always welcomed the unexpected. It has welcomed princesses of candy, kings of ice, talking animals, sentient shapes, and even people from other worlds. That is part of its magic. The land itself seems to sense when someone new is arriving, waiting with open arms, ready to fold another story into its ever-expanding tapestry. And so, walking toward Ooh is never just a journey of miles. It is a journey of the spirit, a quiet transformation that happens within long before the destination is reached. Think of Finn, once just a child wandering through forests with nothing but Jake and a sense of adventure. He too began on a kind of road to Ooh, a road that carried him from being an orphan of a broken world into a hero who helped shape its future. Think of Marceline carrying her bass and her loneliness as she wandered until she found her place in the night sky of Ooh's stories. Even the most unlikely of figures, the Ice King, wandering between his lonely towers, or Peppermint Butler, searching for hidden truths, found their way onto this road. Each of them waited for something new, and Ooh eventually gave it to them. What makes this road so enchanting is not its destination, but the way it teaches patience. There are stretches of silence, long walks under a sky that offers only stars as company. There are moments of doubt, when the path forks and it's unclear which direction is true. Yet in those moments of waiting, something beautiful happens. The road itself becomes a teacher. It tells us that not every question has an immediate answer, and not every longing is fulfilled right away. Sometimes the act of waiting shapes us more deeply than the moment of arrival ever could. Many of us know this feeling, a sense of anticipation, of waiting for a new chapter to begin, not always certain what it will look like, but knowing that it is out there, somewhere just beyond reach. The characters of Ooh reflect this universal longing. They are dreamers in their own ways, holding on to the hope that the next bend in the path will bring clarity, comfort, or adventure. As you imagine walking down this road yourself, perhaps with the soft crunch of gravel under your feet and the cool air of night brushing your skin, there is a serenity in knowing that you are part of a much greater story. The road to Ooh has been walked before and will be walked again, yet every traveler's experience is unique. What you carry with you shapes the journey. What you hope for colors the horizon ahead. There is also a gentle mystery woven into the road. Who else has walked here before? What songs have been sung by those who camped along its edges? Did they find what they were waiting for when they reached Ooh, or did the waiting itself become their answer? These are the kinds of questions that linger softly in the night air, not demanding answers, but inviting reflection. And so, as we continue this quiet journey together, the road stretches on. Ahead lies Ooh, with all its wonders, its strangeness, and its ever-changing heart. But for now, in this moment of waiting, we are simply here, walking slowly, listening to the rustle of the grass and the whisper of the wind. The destination is still ahead, but the beauty of the road lies in the way it holds us, gently reminding us that even in the act of waiting, we are already part of something new. The idea of waiting has always lingered in the soul of Adventure Time. Ooh itself is a land where nothing ever stays the same for long, yet some of the most meaningful changes don't come from battles or discoveries, but from quiet patience. In many ways, waiting is its own kind of magic. It teaches the heart to listen, the eyes to notice, and the spirit to prepare. When we think about Finn, we remember his great battles against villains, his quests into dungeons, and his triumphs in saving kingdoms. But in between those moments of excitement, Finn was often waiting for answers about where he came from, waiting for understanding about what it meant to be human in a world of magic, waiting for someone to love him in a way that felt permanent. His life was stitched together not only by adventure, but by these pauses where nothing seemed to happen, and yet everything was quietly shifting inside him. Jake, too, understood the rhythm of waiting. For all his jokes and playful nature, he knew that life had a pace of its own. Sometimes he would nap in the sun while Finn grew restless, but those naps were his way of trusting the universe. Jake's wisdom was not about rushing forward, but about trusting that the road itself would eventually carry him where he needed to be. It's a reminder that waiting doesn't always mean doing nothing. It can mean learning how to be still, how to enjoy the small moments, how to let time do its work. Then there is Simon. Few characters embody the weight of waiting as much as he does. For centuries, he wandered in the fog of the crown's curse, trapped in a loop of loneliness. Beneath all of that, a piece of him was waiting for the curse to break, waiting for Marceline to be safe, waiting for the world to remember the man he once was. His patience was heartbreaking, but it was also powerful. It showed us that even when the waiting feels endless, there is always a possibility, however faint, that renewal lies ahead. The road to Ooo is filled with echoes of these kinds of journeys. It is more than a trail carved through forests and plains. It is an invisible thread pulling wanderers toward transformation. Imagine a stranger walking this path. Perhaps they come from far beyond Ooo, carrying scars from a world we'll never see. They step into the twilight, guided by nothing more than hope that somewhere down this road, a place exists where they will belong. Ooo has a way of answering these travelers, though not always in the way they expect. This is because Ooo itself is a place of waiting. Think about it. The land was born from destruction, from the chaos of the Mushroom War. For ages, it was a silent, empty place, waiting for life to return. Slowly magic rose, creatures emerged, and new kingdoms were formed. It is as if the very soil of Ooo knows what it means to wait. It carries patience in its roots, whispering to every traveler that change may take time, but it always comes. Even the most whimsical beings of Ooo reveal this truth. The penguins in the Ice Kingdom, waiting endlessly for their king to give them meaning. Tree trunks who lived a long, simple life but never gave up on the idea of finding love. Mel, who spent so much time waiting for Finn and Jake to come home, content just to keep the house warm until they returned. Each of these lives is touched by the quiet art of waiting, proof that sometimes the small moments carry as much weight as the grand adventures. There is a beauty in this kind of patience. It softens the edges of fear and gives space for dreams to take shape. A traveler on the road to Ooo might feel lonely at first, their footsteps echoing in the night, but soon the rhythm of the journey itself becomes a companion. Each step forward is a reminder that time is moving, even if answers have not yet appeared. In this way, the road becomes not just a path, but a friend, a gentle guide teaching that anticipation is not emptiness, it is possibility. The closer one draws to Ooo, the stronger this feeling becomes. The towers in the distance shimmer with a golden warmth, like a lighthouse for souls who are searching. The forests hum softly with unseen magic. Even the rivers seem to carry songs of welcome, rippling as though aware of the footsteps approaching. It is as if Ooh itself leans forward in time, eager to embrace the new stories that walk toward it. Waiting for something new is not always easy. It often carries with it a sense of vulnerability, of stepping into the unknown without guarantees. Yet, in the stories of Ooh, we see again and again that those who wait, those who walk the long road with open hearts, are often rewarded with more than they imagine. Finn found family in places he never thought to look. Marceline discovered love after centuries of loneliness. Even the strangest of creatures found belonging in corners of Ooh that others overlooked. And so the road to Ooh reminds us that the act of waiting is not wasted time. It is an invitation to grow, to listen, and to dream. The path stretches before us like a gentle lullaby, carrying us not only toward the glowing heart of Ooh, but also toward the person we are becoming along the way. On this long path, every traveler leaves something behind. The road itself seems to ask for it. Sometimes it is an old fear, sometimes a heavy memory, sometimes even a name or an identity that no longer fits. That is the cost of waiting. While we hold out for what lies ahead, we must let go of what no longer serves us. Ooh has always been a land of reinvention. Finn reinvented himself countless times, warrior, friend, brother, son, hero, wanderer. Marceline, too, shifted, between villain, trickster, guardian, and gentle protector. Each transformation was shaped not only by what they found, but also by what they released along the way. This is why the road feels alive. It does not rush travelers forward, nor does it hold them back. Instead, it waits with them, patient and understanding, like a quiet companion who knows that the act of becoming takes time. The trees along the roadside sway slowly, as if to remind us that growth is a gradual thing. Even the stars overhead seem to twinkle in rhythm with the journey, never hurrying, never pushing, simply keeping watch as the night unfolds. If you pause long enough on this road, you might notice echoes of the past, the faint outlines of ruins half buried in the earth, broken weapons swallowed by moss, ancient carvings etched into the stones, whispering of battles fought and lost. These reminders show that the land itself once waited. It held on to stories until someone came along who was ready to listen. For a traveler, these sights can be both haunting and comforting. They suggest that while time moves forward, nothing is truly gone. It is only waiting to be found again. The act of waiting also opens the heart to possibility. It teaches a traveler to see wonder in small things. A simple mushroom glowing faintly in the dark, guiding the way. A quiet brook reflecting the light of the moon. A sudden laughter carried on the wind from a faraway village. In Ooh, these moments are never random. They are like gentle invitations, small promises that something extraordinary may be just around the corner. But to notice them, one must slow down. One must wait. Think about BMO again, sitting by the window in the treehouse, humming a tune while Finn and Jake are away. BMO could have filled those hours with loneliness. Instead, BMO filled them with imagination, pretending to be a detective, a cowboy, a space pilot. Waiting became an adventure of its own. That is the gift of Ooh. Even in silence there is magic. Even in the pauses there is meaning. For those who walk toward Ooh, this truth becomes clear with each step. Waiting is not an obstacle, but part of the journey itself. It is in the waiting that we grow into the person capable of receiving what lies ahead. Finn could not have faced faced his greatest challenges without first enduring years of uncertainty. Simon could not have become Simon again without centuries of quiet endurance. Even the Candy Kingdom, playful as it seems, would not have thrived without Princess Bubblegum's patient dedication to building something lasting. As the road continues, there comes a point where the air itself begins to change. The smell of sugar drifts faintly from the Candy Kingdom. The hum of distant magic ripples in the breeze. Travelers may feel a strange pull in their chest, a mix of excitement and fear, because waiting is almost over. Yet it is here, at the edge of Ooh, that the most important kind of waiting begins. Not the waiting of longing, but the waiting of readiness, the pause before stepping into something new. In many ways, this is the heart of the road to Ooh. It prepares people. It softens the edges of who they were so that they can walk into who they are meant to be. The traveler who arrives at Oo's borders is rarely the same as the one who first set out. The waiting has shaped them, carved them quietly like water-smoothing stone. And just as Ooh once waited to be reborn after the Mushroom War, each traveler is reborn in their own way as they finally arrive. This sense of renewal is what makes Ooh so timeless. The world may change, kingdoms may rise and fall, but the invitation remains. Somewhere, someone is always walking that road, waiting for something new, and Ooh, in its patient way, is always ready to welcome them. Yet the beauty of waiting is that it does not always give us what we expect. The road may lead a traveler to joy, but it may also lead them into trials. It may offer answers, but it may also deepen the questions. This uncertainty is part of the gift, because waiting is not about guarantees, it is about trust. Trust that even in the hardest stretches of the road, something meaningful lies ahead. And so, if we close our eyes and imagine ourselves walking that path, we can feel the rhythm of it. Step after step, breath after breath. The stars overhead like lanterns guiding us onward. The world around us whispering in soft tones that the journey is not in vain. Waiting, in this sense, becomes a kind of prayer, a steady hope carried in our hearts as we make our way toward the unknown glow of Ooh. As the road stretches onward, the night grows deeper, and with it, the quiet seems almost alive. Travelers who pause to rest may find that silence itself feels like a companion. The stillness hums softly, almost as if the land is breathing, almost as if Ooh itself is whispering, "Keep going, you are almost there." In that moment, waiting no longer feels like emptiness. It feels like belonging. And belonging is what Ooh has always offered, in its own strange way. Heroes, villains, lost wanderers, forgotten souls all found their place within its wild borders. Even those who arrived with nothing, broken and uncertain, discovered that waiting long enough to reach Ooh gave them a chance to begin again. Finn was an abandoned baby when he was found in the woods, but in Ooh he became a hero. Simon was a man undone by a crown, but in Ooh he found redemption through Marceline and through time. Even the smallest characters, like Tree Trunks or Shelby, carved out homes and stories because they waited for Ooh to reveal what role they were meant to play. This is why the road is so powerful. It is not only a path across land, it is a path across identity. Every step echoes with questions. Who am I? Who will I be when I arrive? What will Ooh ask of me? These questions may feel heavy, but the road carries them gently, reminding travelers that they do not need to have answers yet. Ooh has a way of giving answers slowly, wrapped in laughter, adventure, and even sorrow. At times, the waiting becomes a test of patience. There are stretches where the scenery does not change, where the road winds endlessly through forests or across plains. It is here that doubt can creep in. Will I ever arrive? Will Ooh even welcome me? Yet it is in these endless stretches that travelers discover the deepest truths. The journey itself is shaping them. Even before they set foot in Ooh, they are already part of its story. Think of Marceline wading through centuries of loneliness, carrying the weight of her past like a shadow. For her, waiting was painful, but it also gave her the strength to become someone who could love again, someone who could stand with her friends when the world needed her most. Or think of Bubblegum, who spent years waiting for her kingdom to stabilize, her people to grow strong. In her waiting, she learned resilience, a kind of patience that transformed her from a young ruler into a wise leader. Every example reminds us waiting is not wasted time. It is the quiet sculptor of destiny. The road to Ooh is filled with travelers like these. Some arrive quickly. Others wander for what feels like ages. Some are carried by hope, others by desperation. Yet all of them, whether they know it or not, are part of the same great rhythm, the same patient heartbeat of a world that has seen it all before and still believes in the beauty of new beginnings. When at last the glow of Ooh's kingdoms breaks over the horizon, there is a sense of wonder unlike any other. The waiting ends, but it does not vanish. Instead, it transforms into something else. Readiness. The traveler realizes that the road was not about getting there faster, but about preparing the soul to meet Ooh with open eyes and an open heart. And in this way, the road to Ooh never truly ends. Even those who arrive soon find themselves waiting again for the next story, the next friendship, the next challenge, the next transformation. Life in Ooh is not static. It is always moving, always unfolding, always asking its people to wait just a little longer before the next surprise. That is why Ooh feels timeless. It is not a place that gives everything at once. It reveals itself slowly, like a trusted friend sharing secrets piece by piece. It teaches us that waiting is not just about patience, but about wonder, about believing that the best stories are the ones that unfold gradually, giving us time to breathe, to rest, to prepare for what comes next. So if you ever find yourself on that road, walking beneath the stars, unsure of when you will arrive, remember this: waiting is not a punishment. It is a gift. It is the gentle hand that guides you, the silence that steadies you, the breath that readies you for Ooh's embrace. And when you finally step across its borders, you will understand. The waiting was not about reaching a destination. It was about becoming the kind of traveler who could see Ooh for what it truly is, a place where the past and the future meet, where every story matters, and where something new is always waiting, just beyond the horizon. In that moment, you will know that you have arrived not only in Ooh, but in yourself, and perhaps, with a quiet smile, you will find that the waiting was the greatest adventure all along. And so, sleepyheads, our journey comes to a close. We've walked the long road together, through the whispers of forgotten lands and into the promise of Ooh. Along the way, we discovered that waiting is never wasted. It's part of the story, part of becoming who we're meant to be. Thank you for spending this quiet time with me tonight. I hope these stories have brought you comfort, calm, and a sense of wonder as you drift off into dreams of your own adventures. Until we meet again on another journey, may your rest be peaceful, your dreams be gentle, and your heart always open to the magic of waiting. Good night.